Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Alexa and I'm here with CFIB to present our latest updates on the COVID announcements. As a few people filter in still, I'll just go over the GoToWebinar platform if it is new to you. The webinar platform is a blue or orange flower icon on your screen. If you click here, you'll see the handouts pane, and this is where you'll find today's presentation available for download for you. There's also a pane called questions where you can enter your questions for our panelists today, and we do try to answer as many as we go throughout the presentation, as well as a live Q&A at the end of the session. Following the webinar, do take a moment to complete our short survey just to let us know your experience today. And tomorrow you can expect to receive a recording of today's session by email. And I will now introduce Laura Jones, our Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Alexa, and so nice to be back with everyone. Today we've got the usual gang for our 54th COVID webinar. We've been doing these for over a year now, and I'm joined today by Corinne Holman, who's our Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships, but I fondly refer to her as an expert in all things Ottawa. And Brendan is with us today, and Rachel, as well as Rachel. So the gang's all here, the regular gang's all here. Our last webinar a couple of weeks ago was on the Canada Recovery Hiring Program with CRA, and before that we had a webinar where we hosted Christia Freeland, and so Corinne and I might have a little back and forth at some point on what we thought about that webinar. For those of you who are new, welcome. We've been doing these, as I said, for over a year now, and so we've got a bit of a community of people who are regulars on these webinars, and the purpose really is to keep you up to date with the things that may affect your business, any programs that might be helpful, any changes to programs, get as many answers from particularly at the federal level, but we also do some provincial question answering, anything related to COVID and recovering from COVID that we can help with. So that's the purpose of the webinars. And today's webinar is a bit of a mix of lots of different little but important topics. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge today. I'll warn you in advance, but we'll try and get through it reasonably quickly and then get to your questions. So if we go to the next slide, is our commitment, and our commitment to you is just to keep things as up to date as possible. So we've worked really hard to make sure we're available to answer questions on our helpline, and the number is there at the bottom of the screen, and I'll put it up again at the end. You can also, as Alexa said, download the presentation if you like to have this information, and our website is a good source of information as well, and we're keeping it up to date, and we use the questions that you ask us on these webinars as well as the questions we get from members through our helpline and our surveys, and that's how we keep we know what you're concerned about and make sure we're getting answers to those questions. Okay, on the next slide. We like to use some quotes on webinars, and on today's, I thought I'd pick some of my favorite signs from businesses. I think I mentioned a couple of these on the last webinar, but it's finally feeling like that after every storm comes a rainbow was one I saw very early when I was walking around. And our streets were kind of emptied out, and businesses had lots of signs up, and this was an early one about after every storm comes a rainbow. It's finally feeling like we might be able to think like that. Of course, in the recovery, we also recognize there's a lot of cleanup to do, and we have some interesting data on that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that probably through the webinar. Choosing kindness, and of course, bravo for shopping local. It's just kind of too cute for me not to use from a local lingerie store. We go to the next slide. As I said, on today's webinar, we're going to be covering a bunch of different topics. There have been some new announcements from government on things like border reopening and a couple new programs that Corinne wants to go over, and also some reopening questions. So we're going to talk about what we're hearing on our helpline about reopening, and then a little discussion about the upcoming federal election, lots of speculation about a federal election and what that means, particularly around what that might mean for some of the things we've been asking for at CFIB on your behalf. And so we'll give a little update on where we think things are at with respect to that, and what our approach to the federal election is, and making your priorities the federal party leaders' priorities. On the next slide, I think we have a little humor on the next slide, and so a little COVID humor, which Corinne has been introducing to the webinars. And so again, I said to Corinne, I said, we're getting a little racy on this between my Bravo and this cartoon. We're getting a little racier with our choices for the webinars, but all just meant to put a little smile on people's faces. And next slide. Okay, and Corinne, I think this is where I bring you up, and Brendan, obviously, and Rachel, feel free to jump in if there's any, but we know that, most provinces are now, they're on the road to reopening finally, including Ontario, thankfully. And so that's happening. I know there's still some restrictions, but we're moving in the right directions in terms of removing restrictions. With that, of course, comes some challenges for businesses. And so, Corinne, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some of that, and then I'll come back and interject and add some color commentary as needed.
Great, thanks, Laura, and hello, everybody. It's been a while since I've been part of one of these webinars as well. It's been about a month or so it's great to be back. I'm glad that you can join us if you're new or if you're returning. As Laura said, the reopening is on its way. Things look a lot more positive now than they did just a month or two ago. We have some provinces that are pretty much fully reopened, Alberta and Saskatchewan. There may be some slight restrictions here and there still in terms of a few things, but for the most part, fully reopened. And almost every other province is close to full reopening. They're not necessarily quite there yet, but come August or September, while they may be not fully, a lot of the restrictions will be removed during those times, should data continue to come as positive as it has been for the last little while. The other interesting thing to just continue to remember is there are still some interprovincial restrictions or registrations. So that means in the provinces of Manitoba, as well as the 4 Atlantic provinces, there does remain some rules around people coming and going from those provinces. So if you are fully vaccinated, for the most part, you can get in, but you still may have to register but no isolation required. But if you're not fully vaccinated, you want to visit those provinces, there may be some isolation or quarantine requirements still in place. Some of those are going to be lifting, though, over the course of the next weeks. So we'll have to watch those closely. But when it comes to international borders, there was an announcement earlier this week by the federal government that they will be allowing fully vaccinated American citizens and permanent residents to enter Canada as of August 9th. That just means that they don't have to isolate. There's no quarantine required. However, if they're not fully vaccinated, I believe they'll still have to go through the quarantine process. And that will be extended to international travelers who are fully vaccinated as of September 7th. So that is starting to happen, which I know for a lot of our tourism members is a little bit of good news, given that the season is already well underway, and this will be the 2nd year in a row that they won't have been able to accept those tourists, but hopefully they can still salvage a little bit out of that. But I suspect it's going to take some time for international travelers to return, but it's good news that we're going down that path right now. You're on mute, Laura.
No, I'm on mute. Just a couple of quick things I wanted to add, Corinne. One about the reopening, particularly for provinces that still have masks required. I know, and other parts of the country don't. And I know that one of the things that was really a lot of members in those parts where when going from required to recommended, there was a lot of nervousness around that. And just to reassure those provinces like Ontario, Manitoba that aren't there yet. As that comes, that nervousness died down pretty quickly. And the thing that really helped business owners is just having very clear signs. You're allowed to continue to require masks if you want, and there are good reasons you might want to do that to protect unvaccinated younger workers or unvaccinated older workers or whatever it is. There are good reasons for that, but just have clear signs. That's the best advice on that, and for your mask policy as you make that shift, and know that within a couple of weeks it all settles out, and lots of people, even in those places where it is recommended, are still choosing to wear masks. So that's the way it seems to be shaking out.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to move on. I think the next question is around the vaccine. So I'm going to ask Brendan to join us, given that he's on the phones and has been responding to many of these types of questions before. So I'm going to turn this one over to you, Brendan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Corinne. And as Laura mentioned, even though there's that ambiguous language being recommendations from public health to still wear a mask now while it's optional for you, we are seeing a lot of small business owners who are asking their staff to do it, and even customers to do it as well. And it's important to note that there's good reason behind this. I mean, in most of the province, what we've seen is that communicable diseases, just like COVID, are an acceptable WCB claim now. And so it can absolutely cost you money if your workers can prove that they contracted viruses like COVID, or pathogens, excuse me, like COVID at the workplace. So there's a lot of reasons to do it, but as Laura mentioned, be aware that you might get some pushback from customers, from the vocal few who are vehemently against vaccination and or masks. So just be aware that it could be forthcoming. And what I'm going to recommend too, even before we go into this slide, is to train your staff on how to handle that. And usually we advise not to engage this person. A lot of times these types of folks who do want to voice their opinion on various issues, they want a soapbox. You know, they want a stage to be able to voice their opinion. And if no one engages them, quite frankly, they don't have that that stage. So train your workers on how to engage or not engage, but how to deal with these types of folks who come into the workplace. And as Laura mentioned, have clear signage on your door right away, so that those who may frequent your business are aware of what your policy is. So to get to this slide, can I require my employees to get vaccinated? And this is such an interesting topic right now from a human resources standpoint, from a human rights standpoint, an employment standards standpoint, and even WCB, as I just mentioned. It's such a loaded question. And I'm basically here, and I'll go over what we say in the slide too, and then potentially elaborate as well. But a vaccine policy is a balancing act between keeping the staff and customers safe, and then trying to juggle that with, you know, privacy and human rights of workers as well as your customers. Some workers may claim that a requirement to be vaccinated is discriminatory, as they may not be able to receive the vaccine due to a health condition or religious belief. It's important to note too is while you can still require your employees and your customers to wear masks in your business, you do still have to be mindful of those types of accommodations. If they do disclose and say, I have a medical issue that prevents me from wearing a mask, you still do have to either offer an accommodation, so curbside pickup, online ordering, or if you can't do so, you should still try to accommodate that situation for your customers and your employees and find an alternate solution. In that situation, you would have to be able to demonstrate the vaccination is a bona fide occupational requirement and accommodate the worker. Now, what a bona fide occupational requirement means is that it is a requirement. It's necessary to protect both your worker and the customer. So, for example, what we've seen is where continued mask policy and a continued vaccination requirement policy has been peddled is in the health industry, and that's because those workers are directly exposed on a day-to-day basis to a vulnerable population. So the elderly, the infirm, the very young, they're considered a vulnerable population. And so it's called a bona fide requirement of employment to require these workers in the field to not only wear masks, to be vaccinated. And you can proceed in that manner. The other type of environment that we have seen a requirement to vaccinate your employees, that they need to be vaccinated to continue their employment with you or need to wear a mask, is in unionized workplaces. And this is if both parties, both labor side as well as management, decide together to put in the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, that vaccination is required in the workplace or the masks are required in the workplace. What we're also advising our members to do is, if you're considering making a continued workplace mask policy or face coverings policy for both yourself and for your customers, is to consult your staff. The best way to get buy-in from your staff is to include them in the decision making. And you can just come forward and you can say, you know what, this is something we are considering, you know, with respect to the fact that not everyone may want to be vaccinated, which is fine. You know, everybody has their own different opinions. We're considering making masks mandatory in the workplace, either until such time as everyone decides that they would like to get vaccinated, or until such time everyone is comfortable. You know, get feedback from them. What do you guys think? What are your concerns? What is potentially the pros and cons of this? And get everybody's buy-in, get their consultation. Ultimately, it's up to you as a business owner to make that decision. However, even if what we've seen is that even if an employee is against that type of policy, as long as they felt their voice has been heard, they're a lot more likely to comply with that workplace policy going forward if they've had a hand in developing it. So before you implement something in writing in your workplace, from an HR standpoint, it certainly is best practice to get buy-in from your staff and get feedback as well. And that can be in the form of a virtual meeting, can be in the form of an in-person meeting for all staff. But certainly that is shown to be an effective way to implement this type of workplace policy. Laura, do you want to interject?
No, well, such good advice, Brendan. I mean, always talking to people and getting their perspective on things is, you know, kind of a best practice for people who are managing staff in any circumstance. I just want to talk, and this is more really for our retail members here, likely, but I just do want to mention that, you know, because we have had some businesses businesses are all over the place, and I want to be clear, we don't take a position on what you should be doing. We just want to provide you with the information that will be helpful for you as you manage through making these decisions and figuring things out. But we have had some businesses that are very proud of the fact that, you know, all of their staff are vaccinated, and they want to sort of advertise that to their customers as a safe, you know, we're a safe place for you to come and shop, which, you know, on the surface sounds quite reasonable, but I just want to point out a couple of pitfalls of that, Brendan, because the first one is obviously you need consent from your employees if you're going to go down that road, and it's got to be voluntary. It can't be coerced. So just be careful about that, and that kind of speaks to what you're talking about with discussions with your staff. But the second one that I really want to flag, because people might not have thought of this, and it's really disappointing to see this, but of course, people have very strong views on both sides, and when people have strong views on you know, they can behave badly, and there have been some online attacks for businesses that have been really out there vocally on their vaccine, advertising their vaccines. So you want to be aware of that people leaving bad Yelp reviews and that kind of thing. And so it's not that it's necessarily a high risk, but if it happens, it's really the last thing you need, probably. So just be mindful as you're thinking through these things that has happened to some businesses. So that's all I just wanted to add to that vaccine piece. And our template is pretty good. You'll find that we're staying in the middle of the road, and that's because we want to protect you from human rights, WCB, all of those things. Obviously, if you want to go further one way or another, you know, we'll also help with that. Call our helpline, and we'll help you with this. But the middle of the road is probably the safest for right now. Even governments are working this out. Like, it's not clear, you know, where governments are going to land on their vaccine requirements for staff.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so insightful. Thanks so much, Laura. And it is important. I mean, depending on, it doesn't actually quite frankly, it doesn't really matter which side of the fence you do land on in regards to your view of vaccinations and even masks. It's important to have something in writing. So if you do take a look at our vaccination policy, as Laura mentioned, it's not strongly, well, it's not actually in favor of vaccination necessarily at all. What it does is it gives you a platform to speak to your staff about the potential benefits and the potential drawbacks of vaccination and what that might look like in the workplace context. And And it's important to note that, yeah, that there are impacts to your business. Again, no matter which side of the fence that you find yourself on, it can be a WCB claim down the road. So it can end up costing you money directly. And it's also important to note too that chances are it's going to come to your workplace at some point. It's going to come to your doorstep where a customer comes forward and says, you know, are all of your staff vaccinated? Or I won't come in unless they're all vaccinated, or I won't come in if they are vaccinated. And you should have some speaking points about that. So, and actually to touch on that really quickly, if someone does come in and say, you know what, I need to know, is all your staff vaccinated? What you can do and what we're saying to respond with is say, you know, due to privacy legislation, we can't disclose that. You should be aware, however, that we do have a workplace vaccination policy in place. But you don't have to say what that policy is. You don't owe that to your customers. Say, yeah, you know, we're vehemently pro-vax. It's pro-vax here, or else we don't employ them. Or you don't have to say we're anti-vax. Quite frankly, staying out of that court of public opinion, we're finding may serve business owners best at this point, and just saying we do have a workplace vaccination policy, and then trying to leave it at that, and we can't disclose due to privacy legislation. The other thing actually I really quickly like to address without taking up too much time is the online review. If you do find yourself getting negative online reviews due to your vaccination policy, whether pro or against online, do address that. It gives you an opportunity as a business to show that you care not only about your customers, but your employees' opinions on both sides. So if someone comes in and says, you know what, I don't like that you have a workplace vaccination policy, or maybe you have advertised yourself as a vaccinated workforce, do take that chance to respond and say, you know, we care about the safety and health of our customers, as well as our staff and employees, and we'll take any needs measurable to keep them safe. And if that includes masks, if that includes promoting vaccination within the workplace, promoting distancing within the workplace, we'll take those measures because we care about the health of everyone, and we want to take those steps necessary. So it gives you an opportunity to show that you are a caring business, that you care for your customers, you care for the staff, and you care for the community. So do answer them online. A lot of times if we do avoid that or we ignore what they have to say, it can kind of start to pile up a little bit. This goes with the other negative online reviews too in regards to service or anything like that.
That's what I would say, Brendan, because I think in some cases what's happening is they're not necessarily linking, but there's a strong suspicion that all of a sudden all of the negative reviews, it's a bit of a targeted attack, maybe for this reason, but addressing them is a good practice. And I know you can call our helpline on that too, and we've got some tools and resources for that. And so we should probably invite, I think Corinne's coming back up for the next session, but if you have, for the next part of this, but questions on this, Brendan's happy to answer them. So, you know, shoot them through now or later. And Corinne, back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Laura. So we wanted to touch base on a couple of new programs that were actually announced during the budget, but a lot more details came out over the course of the last couple of weeks. The first is the something called the Tourism Relief Fund. This is now open for applications. So if you're in a tourism sector and you're looking for a little bit of help still, given the impact, of course, that COVID has had on that particular industry, there is a couple of options here. They have a non-repayable sort of contribution, they're calling it, but it's basically a grant or subsidy of up to $100,000, which will cover up to 50% of the cost of whatever it is you're trying to get money for. Or you can go for a fully repayable contribution up to $500,000. That will cover up to 75% of whatever it is that you're trying to cover. So the projects, it is a project sort of focused thing. But the projects need to either focus on product development, and that can be, you know, your ability to adapt your business to the new normal, you're modernizing things in your particular business, for example, or it can be on destination development. So that could be, say, your seasonal business. You want to expand a little bit beyond one season, for example. That could potentially be where you do that. You need to be part of what they call a tourism ecosystem and cater mainly to visitors, not to local residents. So there is a bit of a caveat that restaurants, retail, hotel chains normally are not going to be eligible. However, one of the things that you can, where you may be eligible if you're in one of those industries, is if you are in a tourism cluster, as they call it. So I guess a destination that is really focused on international tourists, and maybe you run a restaurant in that particular tourism cluster, and most of your clients are visitors from overseas or from somewhere else. then or somewhere else in Canada, for example, then you may be eligible if that's something that you're looking to do. The other nice thing is this is actually one of the first programs that they're making available to new firms as well. So even if you have only opened your business after January of 2020, you could potentially also look at this. This is being delivered through the regional development agencies. So that's the Western Economic Diversification, FedNor, ECOA, and Atlantic Canada. And so you will see in the appendix of the handout that's attached to this particular presentation, there is at the end a list of all of those with links to each of the programs that I'm going to talk about. So that's the first program. That's very tourism focused. The second program that was announced, if you move to the next slide, please, was called the Job and Growth Fund. This is also now open for applications, and it will be until 2024. And this is also being administered through the regional development agencies. This is an interest fee repayable contribution. Again, I'm not sure why they call it contributions, but that's what they call them. And that's to cover up to 50% of the costs. And there they have no more than a $10 million sort of total project cost is applied to this one. They actually had, it's about 700 million in this pocket, and they set aside 10% of that, or 70 million specifically for newer firms that were created after January 2020. So to help them sort of build up or scale up their businesses. It's a bit of a bizarre program. I'm not sure exactly how it's going to work, but they do have, you do again have to have a project for which you apply for the money if you're looking for it. And there are 4 different categories of eligibility of projects. And they're sort of listed there. There's like this idea of a supportive transition to a green economy, which of course, aligns with what this government has been sort of pushing. So that could be maybe you're moving into clean technologies. That could be potentially something you could look at this for. It's also, there's this idea of inclusivity. So if you're a business that's owned by an underrepresented group, you would potentially be able to access this. There's also 2 other categories that's much more broad. The third one being around digital adoption and keeping small businesses competitive. So if you're developing software or other types of tools that enhance productivity or help businesses scale up, that could potentially be another project. And finally, the last one is probably the broadest in terms of how to define what it is that you're potentially going to be doing. And it's really about helping Canada with its recovery and growth. And this is really anything that really helps to support scale-up activities for businesses. And this can be in traditional markets or in emerging markets or emerging markets, basically. It could be if you're helping with supply chain adaptation. As you know, supply chain issues have been a very big deal these days. And if there's things that can be done that you could help enhance your supply chain or enhance the supply chain of another industry, that could be in there as well. So anyways, those are just some examples. At the end of the day, it's going to be up to the regional development agency that you're applying to decide whether the project that you're interested in getting funding for fits into one of these categories. But ultimately, we wanted to make sure that you were aware that these particular programs are now out there. The first one does have a non-repayable component, the Tourism Relief Fund, which I thought was interesting. This one is repayable, but it is interest-free, so it would be more attractive than potentially going to a bank. So those are things that are going to be available for the next little while, but we wanted to make sure that you were aware. So those are the 2 new programs. If we flip to the next page, you'll see that we wanted to talk a little bit about the emergency relief programs and where we're at with the emergency relief programs. So the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy are actually starting to decrease as of June 6th and starting July 4th, so the period we're in now, you actually have to have a revenue decline of at least 10% to access those. So up until the July 4th period, so for the June period, you had to actually be able to show, you didn't have to show anything other than just like a minimal decline in your revenues, but after July 4th, you're going to have to be able to show that you have at least 10% decline in your revenues in order to access those programs going forward. They are both at this point continuing to decrease. You'll see on the charts at the bottom of the slide, when the subsidy rates are going to be going down and when. So from the June 6th to July 3rd period, it was at that 75% maximum. For the July 4th to July 31st, this is for the wage subsidy, it goes down to 60, then it goes down to 40, then it goes down to 20. and then it ends at the end of September, these programs, as we go through the process. Now, what I do want to talk about is the fact that our members are telling us there are many members who are doing okay and are moving forward and are feeling good about it. And I think we all want to see all businesses out there being able to get off the subsidies and move into sales and be reliant on sales. And that is the goal we want to see sooner rather than later. But the fact remains that in some parts of Canada, for example, in Ontario, it's only been maybe a week or a week and a half since restaurants have actually been able, for example, to do indoor dining, that gyms have been able to reopen at a limited capacity. So for some industries, it's a little too soon for them to completely be able to wean off of this subsidy. So only 35% of our members are telling us they're back to normal sales. Borders, we now have a date when they're going to reopen, but they don't start to reopen until August. They don't fully reopen really until September, and even then it's only with fully vaccinated. So there is a sense that we get from our membership, not all, but a good chunk, and in fact a majority, who feel that this may be slightly too soon to start scaling back these subsidies. So if you agree with that, we would encourage you to think about contacting your MP. To let them know that this is something that you're not quite ready to see disappear. The government did put into the most recent bill, with a budget bill, that they could extend these programs until November if needed without having to go back to legislative process. So even if we can move it just 2 more months, just to give a little bit more breathing room for some of those businesses that are just starting to feel like they're getting the customers back, that is what we're pushing for. The reason we need you to do it before August 1st is because that's when the actual applications for the next period, for the period we're in right now, actually opens. So if we're going to influence it, that it doesn't start coming down for this current period, then we're going to have to get in front of MPs as soon as possible. So anyways, I wanted to throw that out there, and Laura, I see you popped up, so I'm sure you have something to add.
I just wanted to, as I often do, add just a little bit of color commentary on this as well, Corinne, because I know we had an email go out to our members on this, so you'll have seen this somewhere else, possibly through an email from us. And then we did get we were getting a lot of calls today from members saying, whoa, like enough with the subsidies already, like this is adding to the debt, this is a problem, we've got labor shortages. So and we're not calling on it. So I just want to clarify that we're not calling for an increase to the CERB benefit or to keep that going longer, because there's lots of jobs available. We're hearing lots about shortages of labor from our members. But as you said, many businesses are still in a position where they need a bit more support to transition back to sales. And these relief programs have an automatic declining as sales build up. They automatically decline. We're just asking them to keep them at the current levels. So, for those businesses, the lack of customers is still a big concern, and their lack of customers is due to ongoing restrictions in many cases, or restrictions that have lasted for a while. So I just wanted to make that comment. But Corinne, you and I should also maybe spend a minute on, and maybe when we get to the election, I'll come back up and we can spend a minute on, the long list of asks we've had with respect to fixing some of the programs, and give our members a sense of where we think some of that is at, and where the election will affect that. But I'll come back and we'll do that in a minute. I just wanted to make a point on the emergency relief, and we understand the concern about debt is also there for our members, and so we're not blind to that. But as Corinne said, there is a bit of a transition here, and the ideal is everyone's back to sales and off of subsidies. We totally get that.
That is the goal, hopefully sooner rather than later. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. I did want to touch briefly on the one other program that we did have a webinar on 2 weeks ago, but we still get lots of questions about this program. So I just want to do a quick synopsis of the Canada Recovery Hiring Program, which was launched on July 7th. What it does is it provides subsidies of up to 50% of the extra costs that employers take on as they reopen. So this is basically the difference between in your payroll, because you've increased the number of hours, you've increased the wages, you've hired more staff, between this period today and the specific period from March 14th to April 10th. And it will be, you can look at this each period going forward until November. This will be available till November. They start to decrease that 50% subsidy of the extra costs in late August, and then it disappears in November. But the idea behind this is that it's to sort of also recognize that there are costs associated with the rehiring. And while you may no longer be eligible for the wage subsidy, this will help you with the hiring costs. You can only claim either the wage subsidy or the hiring program. So if you've gone to take a look at it, you'll actually see that the CRA calculator allows you to calculate both and will tell you which one is more advantageous for you to use for each of the periods that are coming. So that's good as well. So this is just a reminder of what this is and how it works. And hopefully that if you have any other questions, we're happy to answer them about that. But it is separate from the wage subsidy, but kind of linked in the same way, in that they are sort of based on the same formulas and the same ideas, but you can only do one or the other. The other key thing about this particular program, though, is you do have to show that you've had, I think in the first period, you don't have to show a revenue loss. You can't have a revenue gain, but you have to have shown a revenue loss. And in going forward after this current period, you'll have to have at least a 10% revenue loss also to be able to use this particular program. Similarly, calculated the same way as the wage subsidy is calculated in that regard. So it is very much, if you'd be eligible for the wage subsidy, you'll likely be eligible for the hiring program as well. All right, so if questions, please let us know. We'll be happy to answer them on that front. We can move to the next slide. So those are sort of the COVID things. There's actually some updates in some other areas that we wanted to also bring to your attention. The first one is one that we're actually pretty proud of. It's something that we've worked on for years at CFIB, and we were finally able to get past the finish line in this last parliamentary session. So Bill C-28 is a private member's bill, which actually equalizes the tax burden on small businesses who wish to sell their business to a family member with those who sell to strangers. So there was this weird anomaly in the tax system whereby if you sold your business to a third party, you actually earned more out of, like you paid less taxes on that than if you had sold that business to your children. And we have been fighting this for years, saying it's unfair, it doesn't make sense, it discourages business owners from, keeping a business in their family. Many of them are relying on as much income as they can get out of the business for their retirement, and so it doesn't make any sense. This is the third or fourth time we saw a private member's bill in this regard to go through Parliament. We'd had the current government say they would do something on this file, but never did. But because we were able to work with all the parties, we actually got it through Parliament, and it was given royal assent on June 29th, which was great. The bad part was the next day, essentially, the Department of Finance came out and said in a press release after hours on a Friday evening that they were not going to move forward with the bill, that they were going to set it aside and try to introduce something new in the new year, which is completely contrary to the primacy of the parliamentary decision making. And so after many meetings, these silly political shenanigans, some pretty difficult conversations with lots of different MPs and people in powerful positions, they reversed that decision just earlier this week and have agreed that yes, this is actually part of Canada's Income Tax Act now and is law. So that is going to be, that's great news for any of our members looking to sell their business to their children. They did flag that they will be likely making amendments to this bill in the near future. But as of today, this is law, and as a business owner, you can go ahead and be confident you'll be able to sell your business to your children and not have to pay additional taxes than you would otherwise. So I think it's a really important victory for us. It was actually our members' #1 tax priority just prior to the pandemic, as you can see on the right. So we feel really good that after much effort and many years of pressure, we finally got something through the system.
Corinne, as usual, you're being modest. You and your team have done a fantastic job on this one, and I think it's been over a decade you've been talking about this, lobbying for this. I know many meetings that you've been involved in where the ministers nod their head yes, and then the finance bureaucrats are like, no, we can't do this because businesses will abuse it. And I know I was involved in one meeting when you were on vacation, and I ended up meeting with Morneau, and boy, I thought we'd find some agreement on this one. Boy, was I ever wrong. That was an interesting meeting with a lot of pushback, and that was the 2019 these results. And so it's just fabulous for you and your team that this is our never give up, never go away. But I also big shout out to all our members, because you filling out our surveys, you may not always connect the dots to what do we do with them and how do we use them. But this has been in so many pre-budget submissions that Corinne's done and has worked with all parties. So it's great. And it was the #1 priority in 2019 before COVID hit. So getting a check mark against this one,
it feels pretty good, and it's nice to bring good news for once to folks out there who may be wanting to take advantage of this either today or in the future, right? So it's good to know that we are able to accomplish something even in a difficult period that we're going through right now. So any questions on that, feel free to let us know. We're looking at potentially doing something on succession in the future and on a future webinar. So let us know if that would be of interest to you, where we'd include a little bit more detail on what this is and how it works. But it's something that we think is really important. All right, I think we're coming up to the last slide for me at least, which is, quickly, a couple other things we wanted to update you on. CEBA, the Canada Emergency Business Account loans, and the regional recovery funds, new applications for those ended on June 30th, just so people are aware. However, if you had made your application to your bank prior to June 30th, you may still be involved in some sort of back and forth with them. If you're part of a small group of people who were sort of pulled earlier on the CEBA program and asked to provide additional information because you had the business number wasn't quite right in the application, your deadline is actually August 20th. And if it's determined that you actually really didn't qualify the first time around, they're allowing you until September 16th to requalify under the non-deferrable expense stream. So there's a small group that is still able to apply for CEBA, but you have to have been in the system prior to the end of June. The other thing that was announced this week is the government is going to be moving forward with fairly extensive consultations on employment insurance, and starting in August. This government wants to make some pretty extensive changes to employment insurance. So we are heavily involved. We've already put together surveys and reports. We've already met with the minister a number of times to sort of understand and put the position of our members out on how employment insurance should look in the future. They say they're going to look at things like access, adequacy, and affordability. They have also actually pinpointed already 3 particular areas they're going to look at early on. One of them, of course, is access to income support for the self-employed and gig workers. We have asked you, our members, about this issue in the past, and we had a pretty decent response that you don't want to see mandatory EI for self-employed, but there is openness to a voluntary approach. So that will be the position we'll be taking into that one. And then there's a couple other areas too we'll have to be watching closely to see what it looks like, what they're proposing, and what the impacts will be on employers when it comes to the EI system. All right, next slide. Finally, I wanted to touch on the federal election. So there's lots and lots and lots of speculation right now with federal election. We've heard it could be as called as early as mid-August, early to mid-August even. Never really know if that's going to be true or not, but that seems to be the prevailing winds right now in Ottawa, that they will be calling an election shortly. There is an election right now in Nova Scotia, which is on August 17th. So my predictions, it'll be probably just around the time that the Nova Scotia election comes to an end that they will likely call it. What we are going to be doing as an organization is we have already started sharing our member priorities with all the parties so that we can hopefully influence their platforms, so that they include measures that are important to small businesses, and getting all the parties to do that is going to be an important piece. The chart on the right is a question we just asked in the most recent survey in early July about what you would like to see the parties have in their platforms. And so that has been what we've been bringing to each of the parties already. But clearly, as you can see here, it's about a clear, detailed economic recovery plan is that #1 thing you want to see each party provide some ideas around. So we're looking for that. All support, of course, our tax burden on businesses, Government spending, we talked about that already. What are they going to do? How are they going to deal with it? And how are we going to get out of these deficits going forward? And the other big one, of course, is what's going to happen with EI, which I just talked about is going to be an important piece of, I think, the conversation going forward. Many other issues as well that are important for a majority of our members, all of which we're going to be raising with our various parties as they go through the election process. What are we going to do? Well, in addition to, of course, trying to influence their platforms, we do a party leader survey, which we get feedback from them on issues that are important to you. And then we share that with you prior to the actual election day so that you can help you make a decision on who you may want to vote for. We're looking potentially at doing videos, maybe even a virtual town hall if we can, with representatives from each party to talk about small business issues. And of course, we did ask members about what questions they would like to ask, and we're going to hopefully find avenues where we can ask those questions on your behalf. So those are just some of the things that we're thinking about through the election. So a lot more to come, and we just wanted to sort of touch on that very briefly.
Yeah, and I think, Corinne, that you and I have been talking about how this election will likely be, small business is always a factor in elections, but we think that small business issues will get more profile this election than most because of COVID and because of concerns around the recovery. So obviously that's an issue. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and this might be the best spot for it, is I know we probably have members who still have questions about, well, what about some of the fixes that we're still lobbying for on some of these programs? So for example, those that were shut out of rent relief, and both some of our behind the scenes conversations with politicians and the presentation from Freeland, if some of people were there for that. It's been pretty clear to us that some of these fixes are going to be very challenging to get. So, for example, the one I'm working on, the rent, getting those of you who don't have access to CERS for various reasons, the holdco-opco issue, or there's a bunch of other smaller reasons. She's been pretty clear that that's not high on the priority list, and some of the ones you've been working on, Corinne. But a federal election does have the potential to shift things around, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and how we leverage elections to really try and make small business priorities, make sure they get into the platforms.
Yeah, as I said, we certainly take the information that you're providing to us and push it to the governments to see that to all the parties, so they can sort of see what the priority is. We also then, we have worked with various parties on putting together or giving them feedback on ideas that may be suitable for small businesses. And when they come out with those ideas, if they sort of follow what it is that we sort of ask them to do, we certainly try to highlight those and bring them to everybody's attention, whether it be through the media, through our membership, or other means. So there's lots of different ways to try to influence governments. Now, there are a lot of competing priorities when it comes to elections. Everything from healthcare to education to the environment to infrastructure and international relations, all of those things have to compete. But I do agree with you, Laura, that given the state of small business over the course of the last year and a half and the focus that I think we all need to put on that and the need for economic recovery kind of aligns things so that we're hopeful that we can get a little bit more concrete measures focused on small business as ideas throughout this election. And even if the idea comes from a different party that doesn't win, it allows you an opportunity to use that to potentially leverage with the new government to see if there's things that they can potentially change or do different that may align with what our members are looking for. So, when it comes to some of the fixes in the various emergency relief programs, I think we have to be honest and say it's unlikely at this point, given where Parliament is no longer in session, it's likely we're going to go into an election, that any of those small fixes are probably going to happen at this point. We will continue to push for them and advocate for them. But I think the likelihood is the window is kind of closing on getting those fixes done. So I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but I also want to be honest with business owners out there about what we're sort of seeing in the tea leaves of what's coming at us right now.
I think that that's really important, and we do sometimes win against long odds, but the odds are very long on some of these fixes now, given what we're hearing and where we think their priorities are. I would say, Corinne, that in my mind, and I'll just validate this with you for our members again, that the two the strongest possibility ones are the CERS rate, and you've got a petition on that going. Again, it's a bit of a long shot, but I think it's a stronger possibility. There's a very strong case. It affects a lot of business owners, and so that one is high. And the other one is access to the programs for newer businesses, probably not pre-election, but as an election commitment that we see that a party might be tempted to make, and then put pressure on other parties. Those are the two in my mind that are the where we've got the best shot right now.
I would agree. That would be my assessment as well at this point. So
yeah. Great. Okay, well, I just wanted to reflect on that because people did hear Freeland say basically she's more concerned with the businesses that have already started. We have been pushing back pretty hard behind the scenes on that, and saying that if you started your business in March, you were of 2020, you were planning that well before, and you'd made payments and all of that. But at this point, I think our best hope is to try and get that as a party political commitment and put pressure on that way. Okay, I know we've got a couple more. Anything else you wanted to say on the federal election, Corinne? I just want to whiz through a couple more slides.
I realize we're running out of time, so we better wait.
I know, and we want to get to a few questions, so let's do that. This is just very, very quickly. We also bring to your attention any other people who have grants beyond government, and so just in case they're of interest, or if you qualify. So here's a Visa She's Next grant program. This is for female entrepreneurs, and if you meet these qualifications, you own at least 51% of the business, minimal annual revenue. This might be worth having a look at, and there's a link to the application there. So, and we've got a little bit of detail on the right about what you need to do, so you can assess whether it's worth your effort, worth your while. On the next slide, Telus. And Telus is one of our savings partners as well. That they have a new, they've had their Stand With Owners campaign going. They had some stuff earlier in the pandemic, and they have kind of a share your story, and you're eligible to win $10,000 in wireless services and local advertising. Again, the qualification is here. If it looks like it might be of interest, hopefully we can save you some time to see if you qualify or not, just by quickly looking at this slide. And if it's of interest, you can learn more and apply. We've got a link there. And then finally, on the next slide, this is our contest that we do with the partners and this one is sponsored by Scotiabank and eBay, and also a lot of great prizes provided, more than typically you get. 100 businesses can win $2,400, and that's sponsored by Microban. And they are, there's some tools that we have to promote it. It's the last week of our contest, so I wanted to flag for you. It's we try to make it pretty easy. So all you need is a customer to sort of go in and just say, hey, this is a great business and we want to thank them for whatever. You could thank one of your suppliers. It's a nice thing. The business owner doesn't really have to do anything. It's the customers that do. If you want to nominate another business in your network and just send a quick email saying, great business, worked with them for years, whatever it is, they're eligible to win. And it's a reasonably good shot at winning these prizes, because there are more of them than typically you would have in a contest. And again, that's thanks to Microban. That's part of our Small Business Everyday campaign. And so I think with that, we are now able to take questions. There was one other thing I just wanted to alert people to. Apparently there's an error on our research survey that just went out, a 404 error, one of those frustrating things that we like never to happen, and we are fixing that. So my apologies if you've tried to fill in a survey. And with that, I'm going to bring Corinne and Brendan back up, and I've got a couple of questions that I'd like to put to the group. And so, Corinne, I might start with you. Denise made the comment, too many loopholes, and I think that was with respect to the tax, with the family business transfer tax. And I know that the government is looking at closing that with further legislation, so you might want to just make a quick comment on that.
Yeah. So I think that there have been some criticisms, and potentially rightly so, of the legislation as it is currently written. For us, it's the principle that we want to make sure that even if amendments are made, which it's likely government has signaled that they will be making amendments to this particular legislation, that the principle, that this idea that you're equalizing the tax treatment between those that sell to a third party and those that sell to a family member remains. So that's going to be the key for us. So we're not opposed to amendments that are going to potentially, if there are loopholes that people are worried about, but it doesn't take away from what that principle is that we're making sure still is going to remain. So that's what we're going to be watching closely. I had a question similarly at saying, thought that they read somewhere that the CRA is going to repeal this by November 1st, or finance. But they can't simply repeal this law. They'll have to go through a legislative process to get eliminated at this point, because it's now part of the law. So there will be a fairly, I'm hopeful, public process that they'll have to go through to do that, in which we'll be there watching and making sure that any amendments that are being made make it a better law, but without erasing the intent of what it was meant to do.
Great. And Brendan, one from Wendy for you. Can the company be held liable if a customer or staff member contracts COVID from an unvaccinated employee? And I know there's not a lot of precedent on this yet. That's what we're waiting for, some cases to come forward, and then you can sort it out. But any further comments for Wendy?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Wendy. It's one we're getting pretty frequently on our business resources helpline. And I guess it becomes a question of liability and sort of, is it the legal term liable, or is it sort of in reference to other regulations? So for instance, what I mean by that is that what we found is in a lot of provinces, and I mentioned this earlier, a WCB claim can be filed by your employee if they catch it and they can prove they caught COVID-19 or any other communicable disease at work. So if they caught it from a fellow employee at work, if they caught it from a customer at work, your business is essentially liable for that WCB claim. Now, as far as legal precedence goes, just as Laura mentioned, there isn't legal precedence really. We're not uncharted territories right now. So, we don't have lawyers on staff here to make that interpretation of prior cases and case law. However, what we have heard, and we do consult law firms from time to time, this is not legal advice, by the way, is that your risk in terms of a civil claim is fairly low, as long as you've been showing to do your due diligence at work. So this means, creating those policies in the workplace. It could be a vaccination policy, it could be a face coverings and mask policy, and it could be things like distancing as well. As long as you're showing to be taking proper steps to keep your staff and customers safe where possible, then we're told that likely your liability in these types of scenarios in terms of legal activity is fairly low. But like I said, they can file a WCB claim, and if they can prove they caught it at work, then technically your business is not liable but culpable for that claim.
Great, thanks, Brendan. Corinne, you mentioned you had some questions as well. Do you want to put those? I know there's quite a few on the CRHP program. That's the Recovery Hiring Program.
Yeah, no, those were not sent to me, but I do have a couple of questions that I wanted to address around the border closures. I had a few questions around, I think there's some confusion around the US side of it and the Canadian side of it. So just to clarify, so the Canadian government has opened the land border to US citizens and permanent residents who are fully vaccinated as of August 9th. The Americans have decided not to reciprocate at this point. So as of, I think just yesterday, the Americans announced they're going to extend their border closures until August 20th or 21st. So that means that there's been no change on the Canadian side. They're still going to allow Americans in as of August 9th, but the Americans have not yet opened their land borders. That's the other key thing, to Canadians who are fully vaccinated. You can fly into the US. That was another question. And so what are the isolation requirements? You're going to have to check state by state because probably different states will have different rules. But you can fly into the United States. You just can't go across the land border right now unless you have special permissions of some kind. So I just wanted to clarify that because I think there was a little bit of confusion that I probably caused. So my apologies.
Yeah. Well, and that land border, I mean, I imagine that's going to be open fairly soon. We don't have any official word on that yet, but there's a lot of pressure being put on the American government too from those border communities that are very affected by it. It's kind of weird because their border has been much more open than ours for most of COVID, in that you can fly into the U.S. But it's the land border now that is still shut. The other thing is on the restrictions, it is state by state, but in general, most things are recommended, not required. I know Hawaii is one of the strictest ones, and they want a COVID test to come in to exempt you from quarantine. But I think that is.
Uh-oh. I think we just lost.
As far as I know, it's one of the strictest states, so it goes down from there.
Okay.
Corinne, there were. Oh, am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Sorry, Corinne. I know there are a few for you and Brendan on. Okay, there are a few for you and Brendan on the CRHP program that maybe I'll put through.
Sure.
So the one is we're hiring subcontractors, not employees. Would that cost be considered for CRHP?
No, it would not be. And I'll have Rachel confirm this for me, but it's payroll costs only, and subcontractors not part of your payroll. So it's only if your total payroll has gone up because your number of employees have increased, or your salaries have increased, or the hours worked have increased. So they're looking at your overall payroll costs, and unfortunately subcontractors are a contract. They're not a payroll. And Rachel's nodding, so I think I'm right.
Yeah, generally, and keep in mind these are active employees as well. So I'm seeing a few questions being about, well, what portion do I add? What do I have to include the new employees in that in that April to March period? And keep in mind that April to March period is a base period that you're comparing what your active payroll looks like, and then you're comparing that to your current period as to what you have as far as active payroll. And the difference between that is the increment that you'll get that 50% of.
So Rachel, maybe while you're up, Dan has a question on what about a returning staff member who was on maternity leave? Do they qualify?
So again, we want to look at what is on the T4. So if that employee was working during that base period, you would include her wages in that starting, we'll call it baseline reference period, right? And if she is working in the current period, then you would include in her, her wages in the current period.
But if she was on maternity leave for that base period, then that's something actually we might want to try and get fixed, because again, with the government's focus on women, that seems like one where we might have a window to fix if that's a problem.
Yeah, so for anything that you're not paying the employees, because most of the employees that are on mat leave take advantage of EI benefits, right? So any furloughed employees, people on mat leave, some sort of sick leaves, like they would not be able to include their payroll because they're not active.
That strikes me as one we should probably raise with the government. Okay, one more on that one, and then I'll do a final round for questions. Staff resigned and new staff hired. So is the new staff part of the CRHP? And I'm guessing, based, Rachel, on your last answer, that the answer is no.
So the new staff would be part of the current period calculation because they're active right now. And because this program is incentivizing employers to hire more staff, right? The difference between the two periods would be greater if you had more new staff. And in that case, you would be hopefully getting more subsidy from the hiring subsidy.
Great. Okay, well, I'll do a quick round of any final questions people want to ask, and then we'll start wrapping up because we're getting, we're a little over our runway. This is often the case, but Brendan, any questions you want to put forward to the group?
Yeah, there's just one, and there's a few different questions that can fall under this umbrella. And employers are wondering, and this is on our helpline a lot as well as our webinar today, is can I create a policy for those employees who are unvaccinated to have to wear masks, where those who have both vaccination doses don't have to? And the general statement for that, and this is for all workplace policies, is that what's good for Peter has to be good for Paula as well. So if I create a policy in my workplace that applies differently to a different set of workers based on their circumstances, by definition, that's discrimination. It may not be called discrimination under human rights definitions. However, they could make a claim under Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. They're being discriminated against based upon different characteristics that apply to themselves. So when creating workplace policies, we have to ensure that it employs to all workers, evenly and consistently and fairly, and it doesn't single out or target any one specific worker based on their characteristics. So if you have questions about that and you're wondering maybe if a current workplace policy you have might cross that line and infringe upon another worker's rights, definitely give us a call at the Business Resources Helpline, and one of our advisors will help you make sure you toe that line, which is a very gray area these days. But just don't hesitate to give us a call, and we'll keep you on the right side of the regulation.
Thanks, Brendan. Corinne, any questions that you want to put forward?
The only one is a quick question from Ian that others may be interested in. He wanted to know if there were any more details on the digital technology adoption program that Minister Freeland had mentioned in our webinar from a couple weeks back. And not yet, Ian, and I've already responded to this, but for others as well, they have called for applications for businesses or organizations to administer the program, but the actual program itself is not yet available. But that's one we're watching closely too, and we'll be sure to share info once it's released.
Great, thanks. Okay, well, let's wrap up. And for those of you, I think we answered a lot of questions. If you have other questions, please feel free to give us a call, and we will be happy to try and help you on the phone line. But Brendan, maybe I'll give you the first last word, and then I'll go to Corinne, and then I'll wrap us up.
Certainly, thanks so much for that, Laura. So my last words are that at last, there seems to be a finish line in sight. At least we hope so. And that's something we're actually working very hard on at CFIB right now, is a stay open plan in case another wave does hit. So we're working on that on the business resources side. I know they're working that hard on the advocacy side as well. But know that as we emerge here, the gray area continues to expand. That thin gray line that used to exist is now about 20 miles wide, and that our business resources advisors are here to help you navigate that gray area. We live in the gray area. That's what we do every day, all day. So please don't hesitate to give us a call, 1-888-234-2232. Give us a call whenever you have questions about anything in your workplace. And like I said, we'll keep you on the right side of those regulations and hopefully make your day a little bit easier going forward. Other than that, though, stay strong. We're still in your corner. We know we're not out of the woods yet, and by no means has CFIB taken a day off to pat ourselves on the back just yet.
Thanks, Brendan. Corinne, final thoughts?
Yeah, thank you again for joining us. Hopefully we were able to provide a little bit more information on a few things. I know it's been a while since we've given one of these more general webinars, so your feedback is appreciated about what other areas we should be touching on as well will be important. I'm also agreeing with Brendan. It looks like things are getting a bit better and a bit brighter, but we're not out of it yet. And so we hope that we can continue to be here to help you. Even when we're out of it, we hope to continue to be here to continue to help you with the business that you're running. We all want you to all to be successful in what you're doing. I was happy to be able to share the success today on our Bill C-208. As Laura said, it's a real, I think, example of our never give up, never go away type of attitude, and that will continue in all of the things that we do. Even if we don't get it today, we'll keep trying and keep trying and keep trying. So please, I I know it's sometimes discouraging, but sometimes things do come through eventually. And I think that was a good example of that. So please continue to fill out our surveys, give us your feedback, because that is what keeps us going as well. So with that, I will pass back over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Corinne, and I'll just come up behind my colleagues. I think Corinne said it well, and as long as it's important to you, it's going to stay important to us, and that's our never give up, never go away. That's what guides us, is what's important to you. And I just coming up behind both of you too on the, as we move from emergency to recovery, I think it's really important that that you know, that we know that recovery isn't an overnight process. In fact, we asked a question on this on our last survey, asking you, what does recovery mean to your business? And for many businesses, it's more than just getting back to full sales. It's also getting back to having paid off debt, having dealt with the stress of the pandemic, and having your nerves come back down to sort of a more normal state. So all of those things we recognize, and then we asked, what on average do you think how long it will take? And the average, and this was across all sectors, for some sectors it was much higher, but the average was 2 years. So we know that we've got some miles to go yet before the cleanup and the recovery feels complete. And I just want to reassure everyone that we get that, even if it seems like, you know, some others are moving on very quickly. And we will be there to remind politicians of that reality, and policymakers of that reality on your behalf. And with that, continue to hang in there, and I hope everyone's enjoying some nice summer weather. And we love these webinars, and so we will be back. We're doing them a little bit more. We sort of think of every 2 weeks, but we're also mindful, do we have enough to say that will make it worth your while? So those are our two guiding bench posts if you're wondering when the next one will be. Maybe in 2 weeks, as long as there's enough to say. And but please feel free to give us feedback on that too. We love your comments and your feedback. And with that, we'll call it a webinar, and we will look forward to seeing you again. Thanks, everyone.